What's up, everybody? Welcome back into Lettermen Row. Welcome to another off-season report presented by Buyers Auto. I guess we could call it the report, the transfer portal report, whatever you want to call it. It's presented by Buyers Auto. It's the 40-year vet, Tim May. It's Andy Backstrom. I am Spencer Holbrook. Tim's got his hint water, and we are ready to get this thing underway. Fellas, transfer portal is now closed. Officially, the spring window is done. Anyone who wanted to enter the transfer portal and be eligible for fall sports is now either in the transfer portal or is committed to a new program. So, with that being said, rosters are officially being set for the fall. Ohio State basically knows exactly who's going to be on its roster for the fall, who won't be. Maybe waiting on one more potential addition after hosting Ole Miss defensive tackle Tywone Malone, I guess former Ole Miss defensive tackle Tywone Malone, this weekend. But the other two guys they hosted, Lorenzo Styles Jr., name sounds familiar, it should. And Josh Simmons probably shouldn't sound familiar, offensive tackle from San Diego State. The two additions, Tim, just recapping this transfer portal window, what did you think of the two Ohio State additions?
Well, number one, what I thought of them, and maybe we'll get into this in a minute, was the relationships that were built that caused both of those to happen. You know, one, of course, Lorenzo Styles Jr., his dad, Lorenzo Styles Sr., played linebacker at Ohio State in the mid-'90s. And for some reason, his kid went to Notre Dame to begin with to play receiver, and now is transferring back to Ohio State to play defensive back, just like his brother, his younger brother, Sonny Styles. Kind of reminds me of the Borens a little bit, way back when, Justin Boren and Zach Boren. And then the other is Josh Simmons, obviously was recruited by Justin Fry when he was at UCLA a couple of years ago. And that paid off because, I think as Andy has pointed out and you pointed out and I pointed out, right tackle is a position of need on this team. It looks like coming out of the spring. You never know when somebody's going to truly get it and then get after it. But they didn't hurt themselves for sure bringing him in. I mean, he started last year for San Diego State. He might have a ways to go from a development standpoint, but so did the other two guys. So I thought I liked both of those transfers. I think they both will help both in depth and in maybe team karma.
I would agree with that. Andy?
Yeah, when you look at Josh Simmons, I think you're looking at a right tackle. We were talking about in the transfer portal, like, are they going to go for a left tackle when they move Josh Fryer potentially back over to the right side? But it seems like with Josh Simmons, it's a right tackle conversation to be had of throwing him in the mix with Tegra Shabula and Zen Mahalski and seeing whether or not he can emerge from that group. And I don't think it's one of those things where we're bringing in a guy and it's, okay, he's going to be the new starter. I think it's very much still going to be a competition among those three guys. And I think you're going to have to see in fall camp of which one emerges because, there were good moments with Zen and Tegra during the spring. There were also bad moments for both of those guys. And I think it's really just that was 15 practices. You've got more than double that really to go in the fall camp to preseason process. And it's not like Josh Simmons is the guy, plug him in, that's the starting five up front. I think it's still a competition, just like they brought in Victor Cutler from Louisiana Monroe in the first transfer window. That wasn't a guarantee he'd be the starting center and interior offensive lineman. As we saw in the spring game, he was the backup center. And, when Jacob James comes back, it's not even sure if he'd be two on that depth chart standing. So again, they bring in these guys for competition. Obviously, they feel like they can help him and he can help them, but it's not a guarantee that they're going to be a starter per se.
Yeah, I think that Josh Simmons provides something for this offensive line. And, I wrote it at lettermenrow.com in the what it means piece for these Buckeyes to land Josh Simmons. It's like you have four potential starting offensive tackles now, and you had 1.5 at the beginning of spring ball.
1.5.
Because
you half guy, that half pint, man.
I mean, you tried to add a tackle, you offered tackle, you tried to add a tackle. You even hosted tackles in the winter window. You tried to add a 5-star tackle in the 2022 cycle that would have maybe been a plug and play. I look at, Ohio State wasn't in on these guys, but Miami, Florida is going to start 2 offensive tackles that are true freshmen. Alabama has a chance to start a true freshman at tackle in Caden Proctor. So you swing and miss on 5-star tackles in the 2022 cycle because you know that 2023 you're going to need a tackle. And then you swing and miss on transfer portal targets in the winter window And so you really only have 1.5 because if you went and looked for one that was a starter in the winter window, you obviously weren't confident that you had one on the roster aside from Josh Fryer. So 1.5 seems pretty apt to me. You find out that Zen Mihalski and Tegra Shabola both have the qualities that could make them a starting right tackle, but they didn't show enough to make you feel confident enough not to dip back into the portal. Now you have Josh Simmons. You feel like Zen has made a move. You feel like Tegra has made some progress. You feel like Josh Simmons could come in and start. And then you also feel like Josh Fryer is your starting left tackle. So
I know I was just imagining a half tackle out there. It's like a circus act, Cirque du Soleil. That's what I was imagining as you said that. I mean, well, he can run block, but he can't pass block. Go ahead.
But, I also look at the numbers on Josh Simmons, and I was unfair. Admittedly, I was unfair when I first saw that Ohio State was hosting him on the Lettermen Lounge message board. I said, I don't know if he's good enough because of just the PFF numbers. You watch a little bit of film where he struggled and you say, I don't know. But you dig a little deeper, 17 penalties, but some of them weren't all his doing. Some of them were.
He was a young guy. He was a young guy starting. I mean, that's what you saw, just like Victor Cutler. The thing that Victor Cutler and Josh Simmons have going for him is they have made mistakes, whatever, and developed, where they were. And that to me is the plus side of these guys. They've been relied on, counted on, and for the most part answered the bell, during their previous stints. And that's what you're talking about, Spence. You first pass, you go, well, who's Josh Simmons? In the second pass, you realize, well, Justin Fry tried to recruit him, so he thought he was pretty decent. And then on the other side, then he's gone through what we saw the Ohio State defense go through last year. He's already gone through that, meaning making mistakes, being maybe a little too eager. Sometimes you can get that out of a guy, sometimes you can't. But I don't think it's a bad transfer, like you pointed out, at this point in the transfer portal era.
Yeah, Andy.
It's really hard to get good offensive linemen in the transfer portal. And I think the thing to be mentioned here is that, yes, he's started a full season at right tackle, and you look at the other guys he's competing with. Well, Zen Mihalski was at left tackle last year as a reserve. Tegra Shabola was at right guard last year, and they've just switched over to the right tackle position to try to master that in the spring, whereas this guy has already had a full season starting games at right tackle. And so I think he has a leg up in that regard, because if you're actually out there playing in games, all the coaches will say it, there's no replacement for that experience. And he's had it. Yeah, he's had penalties. Yeah, his PFF grades aren't great, but the experience starting as a redshirt freshman, he was pretty highly touted as a recruit. Again, as Tim mentioned, was being recruited by Justin Fry when Justin Fry was out there at UCLA. So he was a 4-star recruit. He decided to stay home in the San Diego area and go to San Diego State. But this is a guy that had Power 5 offers, and he was well respected coming out of high school.
And now you've got a guy who started, like you said, multiple games, started an entire year at right tackle. You just happen to need a right tackle. What Ohio State really didn't exactly need, but if you can add depth to a position anywhere, especially after last year, it's cornerback. Ohio State adds Lorenzo Styles Jr., wide receiver from Notre Dame, who now is going to make the switch. Already did make the switch really to cornerback in spring ball for Notre Dame. It was known even before he entered the portal that he was going to be playing corner, Tim. But family legacy. Obviously, Lorenzo Styles Sr. was a big part of the Buckeyes program and went on to win a Super Bowl. Sonny Styles is going to be a huge part of this defense for the next couple of years, at least 2 years, maybe 3, but I would venture to say 2. Now Lorenzo Styles Jr. joins the program and immediately becomes a depth piece, and in the future, a potential star at corner, given the traits that he possesses.
Yeah, and he's just getting his defensive back, let's put it that way, defensive back feet back under him. That's hard to say 3 times in a row. But from watching him play last year as a wide receiver, and I watched a lot of tape, video, because I'm screwed up. It's like I watched a lot of Josh Simmons, not just the little highlight videos he put on his Twitter site, but just some game stuff. And that's why I like him. From a developmental standpoint, you could see him improve as the year went on last year. With Lorenzo Styles Jr., he wanted to be a wide receiver, and he played obviously wide receiver against Ohio State in Ohio Stadium last year, and but not a concern. I think he might end up end up being in that safety room eventually. There are just some things about him that I'm just wondering. Number one, whether he's got the pure speed to play out on the edge. You know what I mean? And we'll see. As the progress goes here, but he's a player. I mean, he's a football player, much like his brother. And it's funny, they're not exactly out of the same cookie cutter mold. You know what I mean? Physically speaking. I really like him because, back when in high school, the way he competed and stuff and just kind of occasionally took over games, I thought that was in all kinds of ways. I just thought that was somebody you want on your football team.
Makes sense. Andy?
Yeah, not the same frame per se, but both great athletes, the Styles brothers. And the other thing is that this helps for the future of the cornerback position because, yes, as Spencer mentioned, they're well stocked right now at corner. But as we saw last year, with injuries, you never really know in the defensive backfield. So that comes in handy for one. And two, even if everyone stays healthy, you could have a problem next year in terms of being a little bit thinner at the position. Let's say that both Denzel Burke and Jordan Hancock have a great season because they've had a great spring. They could both declare for the draft if they wanted to. That could lead them with 2 open spots, potentially 2 starting spots that are open. And yes, you have Davison Igbinosun is still there, and you have other guys like Jair Brown and Jermaine Matthews, but it's nice to have a little bit more depth there. So maybe you're not concerned about having a hole or no depth going into the 2024 season. So this could be a little bit of a plan for going forward to not have a hole or not have the need in the transfer portal next season.
Yeah, I liked that quarterback room, man. Coming out of the spring, I liked it. I mean, I've said this a million times. I'll say it 1,000,000.1. I think that's one of the most improved units on the team. And then on top of that, because they were all, for the most part, available during the spring, and I thought you saw the improvement. And you saw the improvement based on the fact they also went through the grinder the year before. And, Lorenzo Styles Jr. is not going to hurt the depth, that's for sure.
And I think, Tim, could there be a safety spot in his future? Maybe. I did reach out to a well-trusted Lettermen Row source on Sunday after the move was made, after Lorenzo Styles announced his intentions of coming to Ohio State, I believe Saturday night. And I said, could he play nickel? Could he play safety? And the answer was just very simple, corner. And so for now, Lorenzo Styles Jr. is a corner. We will address him as such. Could there be?
By the way, I was making my essay. Is that the right word? Essay?
Maybe. Yeah.
Based on just what I've watched. Not any inside knowledge like the man you reached out to, and you were called for holding on that play, by the way, I think. Go ahead now.
Well, I mean, it's just, I also saw, hey, there's some nickel potential here. Hey, maybe a safety spot over corner. No, it's a corner, and they like what he could do at corner. I think Ohio State liked him at corner before he committed to Notre Dame. They tried to get him to play defense. He wanted to play offense. Speaking of defense and offense, Ohio State.
Hey, let me ask you a quickie, Spence. So don't you get the idea coming out of the spring that they're going to mix and match that? They're going to mix and match that nickel guy, nickel corner, nickel safety, based on, much more so than they did last year, based on who is that slot guy, right? I mean, who is that slot threat from week to week? Because Jair Brown, I think, could be a really nice asset there in that nickel corner, nickel safety, whatever you want to call it, if they want to go that route. And then, of course, using one of the safeties in the other respect. I think that's part of the evolution of this Jim Knowles defense, is I think you're going to see much more of that kind of like matchup, for want of another term, scheme based on who's out there.
Yeah, and I think I agree, because we saw Jair Brown out there as a nickel corner. We saw Cameron Martinez out there as a nickel safety.
Right.
And so you're going to get that mixing and matching. You're going to get those matchups. They don't want to be on islands the way Cameron Martinez was in the open field against Michigan. They don't want to have, press coverage with Lathan Ransom out on the edge against a Georgia player that was the fastest player in Florida coming out of high school.
Correct.
It's one of those things where you get yourself in more favorable matchups. And I think down the road, Lorenzo Styles can help you do that because of how athletic he is. Andy, it's not all sunshine and rainbows for the Buckeyes, just continuing to add top-tier talent. They've also lost 4 players in the transfer portal, 3 of them former 4-stars, one of them a former 5-star. Caleb Burton at one point was the number one receiver in the country prior to an ACL tear as a junior in high school. Never really recovered to be that top level receiver again after the injury. Struggled with injuries when he was here. Caleb Brown, just tough to see the depth chart working out in his favor, especially in the slot where Ohio State's recruiting at just an incredible clip. You also lose Ben Chrisman and reserve kicker Jake Seibert. Andy, is there one of these four departures as we move on to departures that maybe made you scratch your head, or maybe you think is a bigger loss than maybe we thought when it first happened?
I don't think any of them are too surprising. I would say Caleb Brown is probably the most surprising of the four, just considering that I felt like he had a pretty good spring. There was an opportunity to climb the depth chart with the wide receiver room looking a little bit different just because of Emeka Egbuka and Julian Fleming and Xavier Johnson really were not participating for much of spring. So there was more reps to go around, and I felt like that Caleb Brown showed progress in the slot, but also he had a competition going for punt returner, and it felt like he was in that race, and he talked about that and his development throughout spring. So that was probably the most surprising of the four. But again, now you go back to that 2022 wide receiver class, four guys came in, you've got two on the way out now, and it really just speaks to the depth that Ohio State has there. Like, it's not, for a lot of schools that could be press the panic button, we have a problem, what's going on here. For Ohio State, it's kind of, oh, this is fine. Actually, this speaks to the strength of the 2023 class, which, I mean, we spring game, two of those guys, Noah Rogers and Carnell Tate, scored touchdowns. So it's really about the strength of the 2023 guys, and not that we have a problem with the 2022 guys.
Tim?
It's funny. I'm sitting there watching the draft, and there's Jalen Carter sitting there, and he finally gets drafted. And the guy sitting next to him is Drew Rosenhaus, the agent. And I'm going, that's Carnell Tate's guy. That's how far we've come, ladies and gentlemen, in college football. You wish the best for anybody, any of these young men, because you meet them, they're competing, they know what they're walking into now in the Ohio State receiver room. You make your own self-assessment and where you want to be is, how quickly you want to get there. And boy, when you're down in the bottom of that well looking up, and it's hard right now to see buku playing time unless you've really, really excelled. And let's face it, Carnell Tate did that in the spring. Noah Rogers, in my opinion, every time I looked up, he was making a catch too, right? And of course, then had that great play in the spring game, which I didn't see because I was on the elevator going down to the field. But I digress. Bottom line is this train is moving really fast, and if you haven't secured a seat in first class, it's really tough to get there. But especially with the guys they've got coming in and the guys they got coming back. So I can understand both. I can understand him leaving only because there's a possibility of playing immediately wherever he ends up. But has he chosen a school yet?
No.
Yeah.
Well,
so it wasn't like Jameson Williams. He didn't have something in mind before he hit the exit.
And I'm sensing a trend in this wide receiver room, and maybe I'll be proven wrong at some point. I will probably be proven wrong at some point. But you look at Chris Olave, Garrett Wilson, Jackson Smith and Jigba, Carnell Tate and Noah Rogers still unknown. Brandon Innes still unknown. Marvin Harrison Jr. did it. Emeka Egbuka did it. All of these guys who are now at the top of the depth chart made the move at some point during their freshman season to become a part of the rotation. Marvin Harrison Jr. had to wait for guys to opt out of the Rose Bowl only because they were first-round picks. Marvin Harrison Jr. was behind. Emeka Egbuka the same way, but they still did it as freshmen. Chris Olave emerged against Michigan as a freshman. Garrett Wilson emerged almost immediately with that insane catch against Miami, Ohio as a freshman in September. Jackson Smith and Jigba, the first game of his career, had the best catch I've ever seen in Ohio Stadium. So all of these guys who are now at the top of that depth chart have done it as a freshman. And so you look at this 2022 class, obviously they were buried behind the best wide receiver core in America last year. But if you're not doing it as a freshman, the writing is almost on the wall at this point for Ohio State. And maybe that'll change this year because they're so loaded at that spot. And then, I mean, even Julian Fleming did it against Northwestern as a freshman in the Big Ten championship game, had to step up when Chris Olave had COVID. So
Right.
if you don't make a move, maybe as a freshman or in that second spring, it looks bleak because of the way that they're recruiting. And that's just the wide receivers. I wanted to talk a little bit before we get out of here about Ben Christman. I think this is a little bit of a loss for Ohio State. I don't want to minimize any loss for the program. They hate losing guys to the transfer portal. They really do. Ben Christman's an in-state guy from Ohio who was the number 8 overall interior offensive lineman in the country. Spent a couple years in development in the program. Maybe if Matt Jones had gone to the NFL and Donovan Jackson had slid out to tackle this spring, maybe you're talking about a depth chart that looks a little more sensible for Ben Christman to stick around, wait 1 year, one more year, and then become a factor, a potential starter. I always thought he had 4th or 5th year starting potential, down the road. Uh, After development for a while and only having 1 year under Justin Fry probably hurt him a little bit. But I think that this is a little bit of a loss. Ohio State can stand to lose guys on that interior more than they can stand to lose tackles. But even with that being said, I think Ben Christman leaving isn't a great thing for this offensive line, but I don't think it's going to be some seismic loss that's going to hurt the team from competing for a national title.
And the reason is because you put a lot of work, time, and effort into developing, him. And now, like we've talked about before, you never know when the light's going to come on for these offensive linemen. They develop at such a different rate. Mm-hmm. It's nuts. Like you're talking about, Alabama with their prospect of starting a freshman, Well, I've seen a pure freshman start here. You have too. And one, of course, was Orlando Pace. Well, he probably could have started for the Chicago Bears that year. But some guys just take their own time. And that's why when we're talking about, like right now, about tackle, for example, I do know that they like the progress as it was slow but sure. They like the progress of Luke Montgomery in the spring. They're not beating their chest about it, but there's a guy that could factor into the depth chart definitely in the fall, and maybe even see some time at left tackle. So you do what you do, but you do rue the fact that a guy is leaving when in fact you have been working with him. You've been trying to get him in the rotation. You got him in the rotation in the spring, etc. But some guys are more eager than others, and it is tough to kind of like write off that loss. You know what I mean? Is okay, that's just the cost of doing business. But you're right. I mean, you hate to see a guy leave when in fact he might be right on the cusp of being just what you need next year.
It's also hard, Tim, to see a guy in his 3rd year. It's hard if you're in your 3rd year and you look.
That's what I'm talking about.
There's still no playing time to be had. That the patience understand. But also, I will say that from people that I've talked to in the building, Austin Saraveld, another true freshman, was really impressive this spring on the inside. So you start to look down as much as you look up. So like, okay, what's my prospects here, Andy? I think this, like we said, it is a loss for the program to lose Ben Christman.
Yeah, I mean, for every Josh Fryer, there's a Ben Christman, right? Like, sometimes waiting, you do get your opportunity, and you are that 6th offensive lineman, you rotate it in, and you get your break. But then there are also guys that they don't get that break, and they have to look elsewhere for the best opportunity. The other thing about the interior, we mentioned Victor Cutler earlier. Like, he can always move inside to the guard position. He's at center right now. Like, he's played guard before. So I think they'll be fine depth-wise, as you mentioned, Spencer, at guard. I mean, when you look at Ben Christman, 6'6", 315, like, he could even play tackle if he wanted to. So maybe that's what he'll do at his next destination. I know he's a highly touted interior guy coming out of high school, but he's got a big frame. I'm sure he'll be fine wherever he goes. Hopefully he gets an opportunity somewhere else. But yeah, sometimes these players develop. Sometimes that results in playing time. Sometimes it doesn't. But they are developed at Ohio State, and I think that counts for something, no matter where they end up.
Yeah, and I think there's going to be a little bit of a, like you pointed out there's going to be a little bit of a shuffle from that center spot, because obviously Jacob James wasn't available in the spring. He did a little bit of the drill stuff, but they really like him. And as we were talking here, at the end of the season last year, that was a guy that we had penciled in, at least I did, as basically being number 1 going into the spring. And so there will be some bodies, or at least a body available to maybe consider at the guard spots also in the depth range going into preseason camp.
Absolutely. As Ohio State loses 4, gains 2, still over the scholarship limit right now.
Yeah, that's a lot of math, man. That's making my head hurt.
We're not going to talk about scholarship limits because I promise.
You know what matters? That first day of preseason camp.
Ohio State will be under the limit when they need to be under the limit, or at the limit when they need to be. They'll be at 85 eventually, I promise. They've never been over. We've always thought this is going to be tough to get back to that 85, and poof, it happens. So not going to spend a lot of oxygen on the scholarship limit because they always find a way to make it work. We always find a way to make it work at lettermenrow.com, even when we're not together. As we go through a record-setting low temperature May. The average temperature this month of May is like 41 degrees. It's an all-time low. It's going to be crazy. If the rest of the month holds up like this, fellas, you might never see me again. I might have to move to the tropics or something. But for now, I'm still here in Columbus, Ohio, covering Ohio State, as we do all year long for lettermenrow.com. That's the 40-year vet, Tim May. That's Andy Backstrom. I'm Spencer Holbrook. Thanks for watching the latest offseason report presented by Buyers Auto, and we will see you back here whenever news happens for the Ohio State Buckeyes at lettermenrow.com.